The real estate agent beamed with pride as she handed me the keys to my new home. "Congratulations, Mr. Mitchell. Welcome to Sycamore Heights." The house was everything I had dreamed of, a charming two-story colonial with mature oak trees framing the driveway. After 15 years of apartment living and saving every extra dollar, I had finally achieved my version of the American dream. I walked through the empty rooms, footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, already planning where my furniture would go. When I reached the sliding glass doors at the back of the house, I paused to take in the crown jewel of the property. The in-ground pool sparkled in the afternoon sunlight, its azure water inviting and pristine. The previous owners had installed an elegant stone patio surrounding it, with built-in seating and space for loungers. "The pool is what sold me on this place," I admitted to the agent as she joined me at the window. "I have been dreaming about summer barbecues and weekend pool parties since I first saw the listing." "It is a wonderful feature," she agreed. "Just remember that since this is part of the Sycamore Heights community, there are some HOA regulations regarding pool use. Nothing major, just standard safety rules and maintenance requirements. All the information is in your welcome packet." I nodded absent-mindedly, too captivated by my new beginning to worry about bureaucratic details. The mention of an HOA did not concern me. I had researched the neighborhood thoroughly and heard only positive things about the well-maintained common areas and organized community events. My first week in the house was spent unpacking and settling in. The weather was still mild in early May, but I found myself wandering out to the pool each evening, imagining the summer months ahead. I planned to host my housewarming party in June when the temperature would be perfect for swimming. On the 8th day after moving in, there was a sharp knock at my front door. A trim, middle-aged man in pressed khakis and a polo shirt stood on my porch, clipboard in hand. "Good morning. I am Richard Bennett, HOA Compliance Officer for Sycamore Heights." His smile did not reach his eyes as he handed me a business card. "I am here for your initial property assessment and to review the community guidelines." For the next 40 minutes, Richard walked me through a bewildering array of rules, everything from approved mailbox designs to permitted garden plant species. When we reached the backyard, his demeanor became even more officious. "Your pool area will require several modifications before it can be deemed compliant," he stated, making notes on his clipboard. "The current umbrella color is not on the approved palette. The lounge chairs must be arranged at least 6 feet from the water edge. And of course, you will need to complete the pool usage certification course before swimming." "Certification course?" I asked, confused. The agent never mentioned anything about that. "It is clearly outlined in Section 14B of the Covenant," Richard replied without looking up. "All residents must complete water safety training and submit to a property inspection before pool activation. The fee is $350, payable to the HOA." That evening, I discovered my initial HOA dues were nearly triple what the real estate agent had quoted. The welcome packet contained over 60 pages of regulations, with an entire section dedicated to pool usage. As I flipped through the dense legal language, my enthusiasm began to fade. The following week brought my first warning letter. Apparently, my pool water level was 2 inches higher than regulation permitted, a violation I had no way of knowing about. The letter was signed by Deborah Karen Winters, HOA Board President. I met my next-door neighbor, Tom, while checking my mailbox the next day. When I mentioned the warning letter, his expression grew guarded. "Be careful with those," he warned, glancing around before continuing. "Karen is particular about enforcement, especially with new homeowners. Last year, the Jacobsons on Elm Street challenged one of her rulings and ended up with daily fines until they moved out. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived. My pool access had been suspended pending completion of multiple compliance requirements that would take weeks to fulfill and cost thousands of dollars. The letter cited regulations I could not find in my documentation, with immediate enforcement beginning the following day. I stood at my kitchen window, staring at the pool that had sold me on this house. The water reflected the setting sun, peaceful and inviting, and now completely off-limits to its owner. The HOA regulations manual sat open on my dining room table, surrounded by sticky notes and highlighters, as I attempted to make sense of the labyrinthine rules governing my property. Section 14, dealing with aquatic features and recreational water facilities, ran for 22 pages of dense, contradictory language that seemed intentionally confusing. According to subsection C, homeowners needed to complete a water safety certification course before using their pools, but subsection F stated that pool usage was permitted with temporary approval pending certification completion. Another section indicated that exceptions could be granted by board approval, while yet another specified that no exceptions were permitted under any circumstances. I called the HOA office daily, leaving messages that went unreturned. My emails received automated responses promising replies within 48 hours that never materialized. When I finally managed to speak with an administrative assistant, she could only direct me back to the written regulations or suggest I attend the next monthly meeting to address my concerns. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. I arrived 15 minutes early, notepad in hand, prepared to make my case reasonably and respectfully. The room was arranged with a long table at the front for board members and rows of chairs for residents. Only about a dozen homeowners were present when the meeting was called to order. Deborah Karen Winters entered last, dressed impeccably in a tailored blazer and pearls. Her blonde hair was styled in a perfect bob, not a strand out of place. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command, taking the center seat without acknowledging the room. As she arranged her papers, I noticed several board members glancing at her for cues before settling into their own seats. First order of business, she announced without preamble. Approval of expenditures for the West Entrance landscaping project. For 40 minutes, the board discussed hanging flower baskets and seasonal plantings, while residents shifted restlessly in their seats. When they finally opened the floor for community concerns, Karen checked her watch pointedly before recognizing the first speaker. When my turn came, I approached the microphone and introduced myself as a new resident. "I have some questions about the pool usage regulations," I began. "There seem to be some contradictions in the guidelines, and I am having trouble getting clarification on the process to restore my pool access." Karen looked at me over her reading glasses. "All regulations are clearly stated in the community covenant that you signed at closing, Mr. Mitchell. If you failed to read them properly, that is hardly the board's responsibility." "I understand that," I persisted, "but sections 14C and 14F appear to contradict each other regarding temporary access pending certification." "There are no contradictions in our carefully drafted regulations," she replied coldly. "The board has determined that your pool requires significant compliance upgrades before it can be safely operated. The suspension will remain in effect until all requirements are satisfied." When I attempted to ask a follow-up question, she cut me off. "Your allotted time is up. Next speaker, please." I returned to my seat, frustrated but determined to continue pursuing the issue through proper channels. After the meeting, an older gentleman approached me in the parking lot. "I could not help overhearing your situation," he said, introducing himself as Frank Gomez, a 10-year resident. "What happened to you is not unusual around here. Karen has been board president for 6 years, and she has a pattern of targeting certain homeowners." Frank explained that Karen and her social circle used their control of the HOA to punish residents they disliked or newcomers who did not fit their vision for the community. More disturbing was his revelation about my pool situation. "Your pool is not the issue," Frank confided. "Karen has been complaining that there are too many people using the community pools during peak hours. Several board members have private pools, including Karen. They have been systematically restricting access for other homeowners through selective enforcement." 2 days later, a second official notice arrived, stating that my pool had been classified as a community aesthetic water feature rather than a private recreational facility. This bizarre reclassification meant that while I was responsible for all maintenance costs and liability, I had no right to exclusive use. According to this notice, the HOA board could grant usage privileges to other community members at their discretion. That evening, I watched from my kitchen as Karen arrived with 4 friends I had seen at the HOA meeting. They accessed my backyard through the side gate and proceeded to make themselves comfortable around my pool. They brought coolers and music, laughing and swimming while I stood incredulous in my own home. I stepped outside to confront them, maintaining a calm demeanor despite my growing anger. "Excuse me, but this is my private property," I stated. Karen looked up lazily from her lounge chair. "Actually, according to the covenant you signed, this is a community aesthetic feature that the board can designate for approved usage. We are the approved users for today. The notification was sent to you yesterday." She held up a document I had never received, then turned away dismissively. "If you have concerns, you can submit them in writing for consideration at the next board meeting." I retreated into my house, seething with indignation. Through my neighbors, I began learning about other homeowners who had faced similar treatment. Some had given up and accepted the board's authority. Others had fought back through legal channels, spending tens of thousands of dollars on lawyers only to find the HOA's legal fund, funded by our own dues, was substantial enough to outlast most challenges. The system was rigged against individual homeowners. I needed to find another approach. June arrived with perfect pool weather, yet my backyard oasis remained off-limits to me. My appeals through the HOA's formal channels met with delays, additional requirements, and outright dismissals. Each letter I sent received a response citing different regulations or imposing new conditions that had not been mentioned previously. Meanwhile, Karen and her friends continued to use my pool regularly. They had even established a schedule, arriving every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon like clockwork. I documented each visit with time-stamped photographs, careful to stay inside my house to avoid accusations of harassment. One particularly hot Saturday, I watched from my home office as Karen hosted what appeared to be a small birthday celebration for one of her friends. They brought decorations, catered food, and even a portable bar, all to my pool without my permission or even the courtesy of notification. I decided to approach several neighbors about forming a coalition to address the HOA board's overreach. Many expressed sympathy, but declined to get involved. Tom from next door explained why over coffee in his kitchen, speaking in hushed tones despite being in his own home. The Richardsons on Maple Drive tried organizing homeowners last year, he told me. Within weeks, they were receiving daily violation notices. Their kids could not play in their front yard without someone documenting noise violations. Eventually, they had to sell at a loss just to escape the harassment. There must be some legal recourse, I insisted. They cannot simply take control of private property. Jason Miller thought the same thing, Tom replied grimly. He was an attorney himself and thought he could fight the HOA in court. He spent over $40,000 in legal fees before giving up. The HOA has deep pockets, our dues at work against us, and they simply outspent and outweighted him. The following week, I conducted research at the county record's office and discovered something interesting. Previous legal challenges against the Sycamore Heights HOA had indeed been filed, but most had been withdrawn before reaching judgment. Settlement terms were sealed, but property records showed that several homeowners who had initiated lawsuits had sold their homes shortly afterward. My breaking point came on a sweltering Thursday afternoon. I had spent the morning on the phone with yet another HOA administrator who suggested I might speed up my pool approval by volunteering for the Community Beautification Committee that Karen chaired. Frustrated and overheated, I decided to risk using my own pool while Karen and her entourage were not present. I had just stepped onto the pool deck when a security vehicle pulled into my driveway. A uniformed guard approached, informing me that he had received a report of unauthorized pool usage at this address. From across the street, I could see Karen watching from her car, phone in hand. "This is my property," I stated firmly. "I own this house and this pool." "I understand, sir," the guard replied, looking uncomfortable. "But I have been instructed by the HOA president that you are not authorized to use this facility until compliance issues are resolved. I am required to ask you to leave the pool area immediately." "I am not leaving my own backyard," I insisted, feeling my face flush with anger and humiliation. "Sir, if you refuse to comply, I am authorized to report this as a covenant violation, which carries a $500 daily fine. Additionally, I can request police assistance for trespassing on HOA-managed property." The absurdity of being threatened with trespassing charges on my own property left me speechless. Neighbors had emerged from their homes to witness my humiliation, standing silently on their porches or peering through windows. No one intervened. No one spoke up. With as much dignity as I could muster, I walked back into my house as the security guard followed to ensure I left the pool area. Through my kitchen window, I watched Karen drive away with a satisfied expression. That evening, too agitated to stay home, I drove to a coffee shop in a neighboring town, seeking anonymous space to think. The place was busy, with an eclectic mix of customers, including a group of 5 men and 2 women in leather vests bearing the insignia Free Riders MC. Their table was the loudest in the shop, filled with laughter and animated conversation. As I sat nursing my coffee, one of their phones rang with the distinctive opening notes of La Cucaracha. The entire group erupted in laughter. Something about their carefree disregard for the disapproving glances from other patrons triggered a realization. These people lived by their own rules. They had a freedom I had lost somewhere between signing my mortgage and receiving my first HOA violation notice. The contrast between their boisterous camaraderie and the fearful silence of my neighbors earlier that day was stark. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of something beyond frustration. It was the glimmer of an idea, radical, possibly reckless, but potentially perfect. The motorcycle club members remained at their table long after I had finished my coffee. They ordered multiple rounds of drinks and food, their conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. I found myself listening to fragments of their discussion, Stories about road trips, mechanical problems with bikes, and surprisingly nuanced debates about local politics. When one of them approached the counter for refills, I made a spontaneous decision. "Excuse me," I said, "I would like to pay for that round." The man turned, assessing me with curious eyes. He was older than I had initially thought, perhaps in his 50s, with a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard and intelligent eyes. "That is generous. Any particular reason?" "You all seem to be enjoying yourselves," I replied honestly. "It has been a while since I have seen people that comfortable just being who they are." He studied me for a moment longer. "Rough day." "Rough month," I admitted. "HOA troubles." His expression darkened immediately. "Say no more. Join us if you would like. We have plenty of experience with those vultures." I hesitated only briefly before accepting his invitation. At their table, he introduced himself as Mike and presented his companions: Dave, Teresa, Ray, Samantha, Louis, and Jack. They wore their leather vests proudly, but up close, I noticed they were all older than typical movie portrayals of bikers, ranging from mid-40s to early 60s. "So what did the clipboard warriors get you for?" Ray asked after introductions. I surprised myself by sharing my entire story: the pool regulations, Karen's selective enforcement, the security guard incident, and the general climate of fear in the neighborhood. They listened without interruption, occasionally exchanging knowing glances. When I finished, Mike leaned forward. "Let me guess, Sycamore Heights." I blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" "I represented a client from there last year," he replied. "I am a real estate attorney. Homeowners associations are actually my specialty, specifically fighting against their overreach." The revelation that the motorcycle club president was a lawyer specializing in HOA disputes seemed too perfect to be coincidental. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of hope. "Most people assume we are just troublemakers because of the vests and bikes," Teresa commented, noting my expression. "Our day jobs are pretty conventional. I am a nurse practitioner. Dave here teaches high school physics." Mike pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "Morgan Davidson, attorney at law. The free riders is my weekend passion. Fighting HOA tyranny is my professional one." Over the next hour, our conversation evolved from commiseration to strategic planning. Mike asked detailed questions about my HOA covenant, particularly regarding pool usage regulations. He explained that most HOA agreements contained contradictions and loopholes that could be exploited by someone knowledgeable enough to find them. "Would you be willing to bring your HOA documents to my office tomorrow?" he asked. "No charge for the initial consultation. These cases interest me personally." The following afternoon, I arrived at a surprisingly upscale law office in downtown Riverdale. The reception area featured framed legal degrees alongside tasteful photographs of vintage motorcycles. Mike greeted me in a perfectly tailored suit, the transformation from biker to attorney complete. For 3 hours, we dissected the Sycamore Heights covenant line by line. Mike identified several problematic clauses and contradictions, but our breakthrough came in an unlikely section dealing with guest policies. "Look at this," Mike said, pointing to a paragraph in Section 17. "The covenant states that homeowners may host guests at their private pools with no numerical restrictions, provided all safety regulations are observed. It specifically notes that the HOA board cannot limit a homeowner's right to entertain guests." "But they have classified my pool as a community aesthetic feature, not a private pool," I reminded him. Mike grinned. "That is where they made their mistake. Section 23 defines community features as amenities accessible to all community members equally. By restricting your access while allowing board members preferential use, they have invalidated their own reclassification. Your pool legally remains your private property, and your right to host guests is expressly protected. Even if the guests are, I hesitated. Motorcyclists, Mike finished, his eyes twinkling. The covenant contains no restrictions on the type of vehicles guests may drive or their membership in social organizations. In fact, Section 8 explicitly prohibits discrimination based on lifestyle choices or social affiliations. The plan began taking shape. I would host a pool party, inviting the free riders as my legitimate guests. We would follow every safety regulation meticulously, giving the HOA no legitimate cause for complaint. If Karen or the board interfered, they would be violating their own covenant, a fact we would document thoroughly. But this is just the beginning, Mike cautioned. We need insurance, documentation of the board's own violations to counter any escalation on their part. For the next week, I became an investigator in my own neighborhood. I photographed board members' properties, documenting violations they committed with impunity, unapproved landscape modifications, improperly stored trash cans, unauthorized exterior paint colors. Karen's house alone yielded 17 distinct violations of the same regulations she wielded against others. Meanwhile, Mike drafted a formal agreement between myself and the Free Riders Motorcycle Club. The document established that they were invited guests operating under my supervision and with my explicit permission. It included provisions for behavior, noise levels, and adherence to safety regulations. Every club member who would attend signed the agreement, creating a paper trail of our intentions to operate fully within HOA regulations. We will need to document everything, Mike advised as we finalized our plans. Multiple cameras, time stamps, audio recordings where legal. When they react, and they will react, we need evidence that we maintained perfect compliance while they did not. We selected the following Saturday for our first gathering. The forecast promised perfect pool weather. Mike would notify several attorney colleagues to be on standby in case of legal complications. I prepared my property meticulously, ensuring every aspect complied with HOA regulations, even the ones I considered ridiculous. The night before the event, I stood on my back patio, looking at the pool that had become the centerpiece of this unexpected battle. For weeks, it had been a source of frustration and humiliation. Tomorrow, it would become something entirely different, the stage for a carefully orchestrated act of rebellion. For the first time since moving to Sycamore Heights, I felt a sense of control returning. What began as a simple desire to use my own pool had evolved into something larger, a challenge to the petty tyranny that had infected my community. Whatever happened tomorrow would change the dynamics of this neighborhood permanently. I was ready. Saturday dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect summer day that pool owners dream about. I rose early, making final preparations for what would surely be a day to remember. By 9 o'clock, I had verified that all security cameras were functioning properly, capturing multiple angles of my property. Printed copies of the relevant HOA covenant sections were organized in a binder, ready for reference if needed. At precisely 11:30, the first rumble of motorcycle engines echoed through the normally quiet streets of Sycamore Heights. The sound grew steadily louder, causing curtains to twitch in windows up and down the block. I stepped outside just as the first riders turned onto my street. Mike led the procession, followed by 15 members of the Free Riders Motorcycle Club. They parked in an orderly line along the curb in front of my house, each bike precisely arranged to comply with neighborhood parking regulations. Despite their intimidating appearance, leather vests, heavy boots, and weathered faces, they conducted themselves with deliberate courtesy, keeping engine noise to a minimum as they dismounted. "Good morning, neighbor," Mike called out cheerfully, approaching with his helmet tucked under his arm. In addition to his leather vest, he carried a briefcase, a visual reminder of his dual identity as both biker and attorney. Neighbors emerged onto porches and driveways, watching with undisguised shock as the bikers filed through my front gate. From across the street, I could see Tom giving me a subtle thumbs up from behind his partially closed door. The club members greeted me warmly, each introducing themselves as they entered. True to our agreement, their behavior was impeccably polite. No profanity, no excessive noise, just friendly conversation as they made their way to the backyard. Within minutes, the pool area was transformed from its usual empty state to a lively gathering space. Club members arranged themselves on the patio furniture, some setting up a portable grill well within the guidelines for outdoor cooking equipment. Teresa, the nurse practitioner, approached me with a clipboard. "We conducted a safety check as promised," she reported officially. "Water chemistry is within recommended levels, all safety equipment is properly positioned, and we have designated Jason as our water safety officer for today. He is a certified lifeguard instructor." I thanked her, conscious of the neighbors still watching from various vantage points around the neighborhood. Everything about this gathering was meticulously orchestrated to demonstrate perfect compliance with regulations. The first hour passed pleasantly. Music played at a reasonable volume from a portable speaker. The aroma of grilling food wafted through the air. Laughter and conversation flowed easily as some club members swam while others relaxed on the deck. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a group of friends enjoying a summer day, friends who happened to wear leather vests with motorcycle club insignia. At precisely 1:15, a black luxury SUV screeched to a halt in front of my house. Karen emerged, face flushed with anger, clutching her ever-present clipboard. She marched up my driveway without hesitation, her heels clicking aggressively on the concrete. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded as she reached my front yard. "This gathering has not been approved by the HOA board." Mike stepped forward smoothly, extending his hand. "Morgan Davidson, attorney at law and guest of the homeowner, and you must be Ms. Winters. I have heard so much about you." Karen ignored his outstretched hand. "This property is under pool usage restriction. The homeowner has been notified repeatedly that no swimming activities are permitted pending compliance review." "Actually," Mike replied, opening his briefcase and extracting a document, "according to Section 17 of the Covenant, homeowners retain full rights to host guests at private pool facilities regardless of compliance status, provided basic safety standards are maintained. We have documented our full compliance with those standards." "This is not a private pool facility," Karen snapped. "It has been reclassified as a community aesthetic feature under board authority." "I anticipated that response," Mike continued calmly. "Section 23 clearly states that community features must be accessible to all residents equally. By allowing selective usage by board members while restricting the actual homeowner, you have invalidated your own reclassification. I have photographs and witness statements documenting board members using this pool while the owner was barred from access." Karen's expression flickered between rage and uncertainty. "These people cannot be here," she insisted, gesturing toward the bikers. "They are not residents." Section 8 explicitly protects the homeowner's right to entertain guests without discrimination based on lifestyle choices or social affiliations, Mike countered, producing another document. Additionally, I would like to point out that every aspect of this gathering complies meticulously with HOA regulations regarding noise levels, safety protocols, and property usage. For perhaps the first time in her reign as HOA president, Karen found herself without an immediate regulatory response. She glared at the gathering, searching desperately for a violation she could cite. "This is unacceptable," she finally declared. "I am calling security." "You are certainly within your rights to do so," Mike replied pleasantly. "Though I should mention that my firm specializes in HOA disputes, and we would view any attempt to remove lawful guests from private property as actionable harassment." Karen retreated to her vehicle to make her calls. Within 20 minutes, the same security guard who had escorted me from my own pool arrived, looking distinctly uncomfortable with the situation. After a brief conversation with Mike, during which the relevant covenant sections were reviewed, the guard informed Karen that he could find no basis for intervention. "These individuals are invited guests of the homeowner," he explained reluctantly. "They are not violating any noise ordinances or safety regulations." Karen's next move was to call the police. 2 officers arrived promptly, conducted a professional assessment of the situation, and reached the same conclusion. One officer actually appeared to be suppressing a smile as he explained to Karen that no laws were being broken and that the gathering appeared to be a peaceful assembly of friends on private property. Throughout these confrontations, the free riders continued their party with deliberate normality. They swam, grilled food, and conversed, demonstrating a level of civic behavior that contrasted sharply with Karen's increasingly agitated state. As the afternoon progressed, I noticed an interesting development. Some neighbors who had initially watched with alarm were now observing with what appeared to be admiration. A few even waved or nodded approvingly when they caught my eye. By sunset, Karen had retreated in defeat, and the party concluded exactly as planned. The bikers cleaned the area thoroughly, thanked me for my hospitality, and departed with the same orderly demeanor with which they had arrived. The rumble of motorcycles faded into the distance, leaving the neighborhood in a silence that somehow felt different than before. "Same time next Saturday?" Mike asked with a grin as he prepared to leave. I nodded, feeling a surge of satisfaction. "And perhaps Wednesday evening as well. I believe the covenant permits reasonable weekday gatherings until 9 o'clock. As I cleaned up the few remaining items, Tom appeared at the side gate. "That," he said with quiet admiration, "was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in this neighborhood. How did you manage it?" "I simply read the rules carefully," I replied, "and found friends who understand that sometimes following the letter of the law is the most radical form of rebellion." The following morning, notices appeared on every doorstep in Sycamore Heights announcing an emergency HOA board meeting scheduled for Monday evening. The agenda listed only one item: amendment of pool usage and guest policies. Mike reviewed the announcement when I forwarded it to him. "Exactly as expected," he confirmed over the phone. "They will try to close the loopholes we exploited, but covenant amendments require a 2/3 majority vote of all homeowners, not just the board. They cannot implement changes overnight." Monday evening arrived with an unprecedented turnout for the HOA meeting. The community center was filled beyond capacity, with residents standing along the walls. I arrived with Mike, who had traded his leather vest for a conservative suit. He carried a professional briefcase and legal pad, every inch the experienced attorney. Karen called the meeting to order with visible tension in her posture. The board has called this emergency session to address a serious issue affecting our community standards, she began, avoiding looking in my direction. Recent events have highlighted the need for clearer regulations regarding private pool usage and guest policies. The proposed amendments were draconian, limiting guests to a maximum of 5 per household, requiring guest lists to be submitted for approval 72 hours in advance, prohibiting commercial or organized social groups from utilizing private facilities, and granting the board authority to reject guests based on community standards and values. When the floor opened for comments, Mike approached the microphone. Morgan Davidson, representing the homeowner at 47 Oakwood Drive, he introduced himself. I would like to remind the board that covenant amendments require proper notice and a supermajority vote of all homeowners, not merely those present tonight. He proceeded to methodically dismantle the proposed amendments, citing legal precedents that would render them unenforceable even if passed. Furthermore, he concluded, any regulations that appear to target specific social groups or attempt to regulate the types of legal organizations homeowners may associate with would likely violate federal housing discrimination laws. The meeting adjourned with no action taken, but Karen's expression as she gathered her papers promised that the conflict was far from over. Her final glance in my direction contained pure venom. The next morning, I awoke to find my front lawn had been vandalized overnight. Someone had poured an unknown chemical creating brown patches in the shape of obscene words. My mailbox had been knocked off its post, and my garbage cans overturned. That same day, I received notices for 6 different alleged covenant violations, each carrying potential fines. The violations ranged from the ridiculous, improper mailbox positioning after it had been vandalized, to the absurd, unapproved lawn discoloration pattern. I called Mike immediately, who advised me to document everything and install security cameras covering all approaches to my property. By that afternoon, a professional security company had installed a comprehensive system with motion-activated recording and real-time alerts to my phone. The Free Riders' Wednesday evening gathering proceeded as planned, though with a smaller group of 10 members. They arrived to find anonymous signs posted along my street reading, "No Biker GANGS," and "Keep Sycamore HEIGHTS safe." The signs disappeared quickly when Mike photographed them and loudly discussed their potential as evidence of discriminatory harassment. That night, my security system captured its first significant footage. At 2:17 a.m., 2 figures approached my front yard carrying containers of liquid. The infrared cameras clearly showed Karen and a man I recognized as her husband Richard preparing to dump the contents on my lawn. The security lights activated automatically when they came within range, startling them into retreating to their vehicle parked down the street. The following morning, I forwarded the footage to Mike, who advised me to file a police report for attempted vandalism. The responding officer viewed the footage and took a formal statement, explaining that while the evidence showed suspicious behavior, no actual crime had been committed since they had fled before causing damage. The weekend brought our second scheduled pool party, this time with increased attendance. 25 free riders arrived, again conducting themselves with deliberate courtesy and compliance with all regulations. News of our conflict had spread through the club, attracting members curious to participate in what they viewed as a righteous battle against petty tyranny. Karen's response escalated dramatically. She arranged for 3 security guards to park at the entrance to my street, creating an intimidating presence for arriving guests. She and several board members positioned themselves across from my house, openly photographing and recording everyone who entered. Most disturbing was the appearance of official-looking notices on my door, and gate claiming that the property was under covenant violation quarantine, and that entrance was restricted to residents only. Mike immediately recognized these as fraudulent documents with no legal standing. The confrontation reached its peak when Karen physically placed herself at my front gate, attempting to block the entrance of several club members arriving on foot. "You are not permitted on this property," she declared, positioning herself directly in front of Teresa and Ray. "This entire gathering violates community standards." "Excuse me," Mike said, approaching calmly with his phone recording. "You are physically blocking invited guests from accessing private property. That constitutes illegal detention and possibly assault. Please step aside." "This is HOA business," Karen insisted, her voice rising. "These people are not welcome in Sycamore Heights." "That is not for you to decide," Mike replied evenly. "The homeowner has extended an invitation, which these individuals have accepted. Your personal feelings about their appearance or lifestyle are irrelevant." Several neighbors had gathered to watch the confrontation, including Tom and his wife from next door. In a surprising development, Tom stepped forward. "Karen, this has gone far enough," he said firmly. "You cannot physically block people from visiting their friends. What you are doing is wrong." Karen turned on him furiously. "You will regret taking his side, Tom. I guarantee your yard will be under compliance review by Monday morning." The threat, issued publicly in front of witnesses and captured on multiple recordings, marked a critical turning point. Her words revealed the retaliatory nature of her enforcement actions, confirming what many residents had long suspected, but never heard stated so explicitly. After several tense moments, Karen finally stepped aside, but not before issuing a final warning. "This neighborhood is changing for the worse because of people like you," she hissed at me. "We will restore proper standards, whatever it takes." That night, after the party concluded, several free riders volunteered to patrol the neighborhood discreetly, parking at various locations to observe any suspicious activity. Their vigilance proved warranted when, at approximately 1:30 a.m., my security system alerted me to movement in my side yard. The footage showed Richard Winters and another board member attempting to access my circuit breaker panel, presumably to cut power to my security system. The motorcycle club members approached them calmly, their presence alone sufficient to send the would-be vandals hurrying back to their vehicle. By morning, news of the confrontation had spread throughout the neighborhood. The explicit threat against Tom, the attempted tampering with my electrical system, and Karen's increasingly unhinged behavior had shifted public opinion. Neighbors who had remained silent out of fear began reaching out privately, sharing their own stories of selective enforcement and retribution. What had begun as a simple dispute over pool access had evolved into a community-wide reckoning. The HOA's pattern of intimidation, once hidden behind closed doors and official notices, was now being exposed to public scrutiny. And with each escalation, Karen and her allies provided more evidence of their improper conduct. The momentum had shifted. Now it was time to bring everything into the light. The quarterly all-community HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening. Traditionally, these meetings saw minimal attendance, usually just the board members and a handful of retirees with nothing better to do. This meeting would be different. I spent the intervening days organizing evidence and gathering testimonials from neighbors who had experienced similar treatment. Mike helped craft a formal presentation documenting the pattern of selective enforcement, retaliation, and abuse of authority. We compiled video evidence, photographs, an official HOA correspondence that revealed the discrepancies between stated rules and actual enforcement. The free riders spread the word through their networks, connecting us with 3 other homeowners from nearby communities who had successfully challenged their own HOAs. These individuals agreed to attend and share their experiences. By 6 o'clock on Thursday evening, the community center parking lot was filled beyond capacity. Residents who had never attended a meeting arrived early to secure seats. The back wall filled with leather-vested free riders, standing quietly and respectfully, their presence making a silent statement. Karen and the board members entered to find an overflow crowd instead of the usual empty chairs. Her momentary expression of shock quickly transformed into a rigid smile as she called the meeting to order, attempting to proceed with routine business as if nothing unusual was happening. When the agenda reached open floor for community concerns, I approached the microphone. Behind me, Mike set up a laptop and projector connected to a portable screen. "My name is Alex Mitchell, homeowner at 47 Oakwood Drive," I began. "I would like to address ongoing concerns about selective enforcement of covenant regulations and abuse of authority by the current board." Karen attempted to limit my time to the standard 3 minutes, but a chorus of voices from the audience insisted I be allowed to present fully. For the first time, she found herself outnumbered and outmaneuvered in her own domain. The presentation began with my personal experience, the arbitrary pool restrictions, the unauthorized usage by board members, the escalating retaliation when I asserted my rights. Then we broadened the scope, showing documented cases of similar treatment experienced by other homeowners. Security footage played on the screen showing Karen and Richard vandalizing my property and attempting to tamper with my electrical system. Audio recordings captured Karen explicitly threatening retribution against homeowners who questioned her authority. Most damning was the documentation of covenant violations committed by board members themselves, the same violations for which other residents had been fined or sanctioned. Side-by-side photographs showed identical infractions, treated completely differently depending on who committed them. "This is not about motorcycles or pool parties," I explained. "This is about fairness, consistency, and the proper role of an HOA. The covenant exists to maintain community standards, not to serve as a weapon for personal vendettas or selective enforcement." As I concluded, several neighbors came forward to share their own experiences. Tom described years of intimidation that had kept him and others silent. An elderly couple recounted being fined for medical equipment visible from the street. A single mother explained how Karen had scheduled compliance inspections, specifically when the woman was known to be at work, resulting in automatic failures. The pattern became undeniable, the evidence overwhelming. Karen attempted several times to regain control of the meeting, but the community had found its voice. Mike approached the microphone next, explaining the legal vulnerabilities created by the board's actions. "Selective enforcement undermines the entire covenant," he explained. "When rules are applied inconsistently based on personal relationships or prejudices, the legal foundation of the HOA itself is compromised." A motion was introduced from the floor calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current board. Karen objected vehemently, citing procedural rules, but the tide had turned irrevocably against her. The vote was overwhelming. More than 80% of attending homeowners supported removing the current board and holding new elections under the supervision of an independent property management company. "You cannot do this," Karen shouted as the results were announced. "This meeting is adjourned." "Actually," Mike interjected calmly, Section 4 of the covenant is quite clear that a supermajority vote of homeowners present at a quarterly meeting can remove board members for cause. The evidence presented tonight more than establishes cause." As Karen and her allies stormed out, the remaining residents organized an interim leadership committee to manage HOA affairs until proper elections could be held. To my surprise, several neighbors nominated me to serve on this committee, citing my commitment to fairness and transparency. The following weekend, we held a true community gathering at my pool, not as an act of rebellion, but as a celebration of restored balance. Families with children, elderly couples, and yes, several free riders all mingled together. The invisible barriers that had divided the neighborhood began to dissolve as people who had lived as strangers for years actually introduced themselves to one another. Karen and Richard Winters put their house on the market the following month. The "For Sale" sign appeared without fanfare, and they conducted showings only when most neighbors were at work. Before leaving, they received formal notice that their documented vandalism and harassment had been referred to the district attorney's office for review. The new HOA board, elected in a record turnout special election, immediately implemented reforms, transparent enforcement procedures, an appeals process for violations, and restrictions on how long any individual could serve in leadership positions. 1 year later, Sycamore Heights had transformed. The free riders still visited regularly, though now as welcome friends rather than instruments of rebellion. Some had even purchased homes in the community, bringing diversity of thought and experience that enriched everyone. As for my pool, it remained private property, open to invited guests regardless of their appearance, vehicle preference, or social affiliations. The water sparkled in the summer sun, reflecting not just the blue sky above but the faces of a community that had reclaimed its soul from petty tyranny. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes freedom is won not through grand gestures, but through the patient application of rules correctly interpreted. And sometimes, the perfect rebellion is simply insisting that the powerful live by the same standards they impose on others. In the end, Karen had been right about one thing. The neighborhood had indeed changed for the better, just not in the way she had intended.